Hey, this is Tim from Sentient Cinema, and I'm here to do a quick video for you guys about how I went about making the teaser trailer for Uploader. So right off the bat, we're going to start off in Nuke, and for those of you not familiar with Nuke, it is a compositing application. It's what I use in my day job, and it's a really powerful thing. It's sort of like Photoshop for video, only you work with the interface a little bit differently. You use these nodes that you see, which each one represents a different operation being applied to something. So you can kind of read from top to bottom what's going on in your comp. So to start off with, we've got the logo for Uploader that you'll see right here. This is not the fully finalized design, but it's close enough. It's just Century Gothic text created in Blender and then exported an OBJ file that Nuke can read, and that's what you're seeing right here. And we're going to use this as a emission point for our particle system. So to start off with, I'll show you the particle system just in its most basic form without the binary setup that I created. And you'll see here, once I scroll through these emitters, each one of these is a different particle emitter, and what that does is it generates particles based on the various settings that you have access to: velocity, rotation, lifetime, all that fun stuff. So each frame, a different set of particles is generated based on these settings, and those particles travel through the 3D space in Nuke, and their behavior is determined by these values and the various other operations going on in the comp further down. So if you've seen the trailer, which you should probably go watch it if you haven't already to fully grasp what I'm talking about, you'll see it's a bunch of ones and zeros that appear in space, float around, and then collect together and sort of self-organize into the Uploader logo that you see here. So the way I did that was I did everything in reverse. So basically the particles emit on the first frame. They start emitting, as you see here. And once we get to a certain point, the particle turbulence node, which does exactly what it sounds like, it just adds turbulence to the particles, which when I access that, it's animated to come on at a certain point and then have the whole thing be played in reverse so that it looks like they coalesce from this massive, random spacing of binary numbers. So what you're seeing right here is that sort of turbulence applied version of the particles, and the further down we get in the timeline, the more turbulent they are, so the more separation and sort of randomness there is to them. And then as we move backwards in the timeline here, you'll see they do kind of what they do in the trailer, which is they sort of coalesce together and end up following a path that matches exactly with the Uploader logo, and such allows them to coalesce into the letters themselves. So this is the basic setup for the particles. It's just what I just described. It's a very simple two-node thing inside, or three-node thing at this point inside Nuke, with the geo, the Uploader logo that is emitting the particles here, and then turbulence that's animating on here. And then this is our section where we apply a camera, and this was one of the things that was difficult to nail down right off the bat, so the particle system was kept very simple so that the camera move could be nailed down. And then once that was decided upon, after a few versions, I could go in and render high quality 3D zeros and ones in the place of these sort of just flat squares, which is what you see right now. And these are super fast to work with, but obviously don't look very interesting. Once I switch out the zeros and ones for these flat squares, you'll see it's going to process and chug along while it figures out what it's doing. But the result is all of those little flat squares turn into zeros and ones, each of them its own 3D object in space, and that's what gets rendered out. to the final image. And you'll see that the camera move, as we go through time, is pointing upwards at the turbulated particles. I don't know if turbulate is the word. The turbulent particles, which then, as the camera swings around, coalesce into the logo. And again, played in reverse, that's what you see. So that all gets rendered out here. A few other nodes doing nothing too interesting. Then we've got our actual render, which if played forward, we see sort of what we see in the trailer. But that's not enough. We need to make this look much cooler than it looks right out of the box. So here's our rough, sort of base render. And we've got a few of these. I did a few different passes, so I had some different things to play with, including this one, which is a different method of emitting the particles, where it will emit them in sort of chunks and then stop emitting for a bit and then go through and emit again. And what that does is kind of creates these shapes that are designed like the logo is designed, and sort of creates this whooshing by camera cool effect. Did the same, another sort of pass at using just the regular sort of square particles to generate some interesting sort of waves of particles that I could use to affect the lighting and such later. So what I'm doing here is just taking the original particle render. I'm shuffling the depth and the depth map that I rendered out from the camera earlier into the RGB channels. And what that's doing is, you'll see here the stuff that's closest to camera is bright, the stuff that's furthest gets darker. And then I use a color lookup node to apply a curve that you see here, which takes this sort of the original depth map and applies a bit of a more pleasing black level to it, and a grade that brings up the overall values. And then I merge that over a slightly dimmed version of the original render, just to make sure we can see all of those particles. I do another grade, a few other tweaks, and then here's the really key thing, is I have the original camera up here used to render these particles connected to a bunch of motion blur nodes. And this is applying motion blur to the images based on how quickly the camera itself was moving. Let's see here. And yeah, so what that's doing is basically integrating the motion blur that you would get from the camera move into the image without having to bake it into the render, which would have taken much longer. And I can control, exactly how much motion blur gets applied in this node, which is the vector blur node. So basically the motion blur node's taking the vectors from the camera. The vectors are just the direction the camera is moving. And then this vector blur node applies the actual blur. So you can see here, here's the motion blurred version. Here's the unmotion blurred version. It's ugly, it's aliased, but as soon as I put that motion blur on, it looks much more realistic, like the camera was whipping past all of these ones and zeros. And then I have some other treatments, some directional blur that I added myself after the fact to kind of give them their own directional motion blur towards where the particles were rushing. Again, I could have done this baked into the render out of the particle setup, but it would have taken much, much longer. And doing this on your home machine is already going to be pretty slow when you're dealing with thousands and thousands of particles and all the math involved. So it's best to kind of do this thing in post, so to speak. So this gives those particles a rushing by camera feeling. I did that for all of these passes. And here they all are merged together. I merged them together just to get a feeling for what they would all look like together, but rendered them out separately. So I had 4 separate passes with all of these effects applied. So then that gave me my my base 4 passes that we're going to go into After Effects in a bit, which is what you see here. getting rendered out into Apple Intermediate Codec QuickTimes. Not worried about the bit depth of that codec. There's going to be grain applied and other things done in After Effects that will. I mean, I don't really have to worry about banding, and it's pretty simple black and white imagery, so not too concerned. All of this you're seeing here is, again, just the uploader logo. Close these so we can see what we're looking at here. Just that uploader logo, but it's the version from Blender that has all of the sharpening and other tweaks to the sort of silhouette that you can read about in the post about the typography design of the logo. And this is where I'm just applying a simple light, and I've got a material setting that kind of gives it a metallic sheen, and this is what gets rendered out to create the actual final graphic. Not quite final, some other things happen to it. And that's what you see down here, which is that graphic set through a system of crops and transforms, and these crops are cropping each letter separately and then transforming them to their original positions again when they're all merged together. And then I have these additional transforms here, and you'll see these green lines linked to the character space controller. And this is a little widget I made, I guess kind of mini gizmo that controls the spacing of the characters, much like the kind of control you'd have, built into Photoshop or any typesetting program. I made one myself that I could use with the just broken out 3D render of the logo. And what you'll see is I have control over the spacing between the characters, and this is just sending this value to the transforms with the different multipliers and positive or negative values to push them away from the center as needed. That gets rendered out as an animated sequence, which is what you see right here, which is the logo just doing that slow animated increase in spacing that you see right here, which is what ends up in the trailer. So all of this stuff done in Nuke with the help of Blender. Blender is a fantastic free 3D CG application that I highly recommend if you're just doing some super basic stuff like this. You don't need anything crazy fancy or expensive. So check out Blender for sure. Nuke is an expensive program, but it's worth it for me to have it because I know how to use it inside and out, and I can create this kind of stuff pretty quickly, which is definitely advantageous when you don't have a ton of time and but want to create something nice and high quality. So we've got all this stuff rendered out. Now let's take it into After Effects. And After Effects is fantastic for sort of finishing all of this kind of stuff because it lets you shift things in time and move things around in a sort of more friendly, so to speak, in terms of editorial capability. It's very obvious with this layer structure where things are, when they're happening. Animating values is much more intuitive. So that's why I bring everything into After Effects to finish. And here's where we've got the various passes that were rendered out. Let's go to a frame where I can show you exactly what's going on here. Okay, so I'll turn off all this stuff and we'll just start from scratch, and you'll see how I put things together here. So the first layer is the title, which we talked about earlier, comes on here. So you see there's our title slid in time. I don't believe I did any yeah, I had a bit of a shine treatment on here. That's right, which is when the title comes into play. It's this is an effect from Red Giant's Particular plugin pack, which I highly recommend, especially if you want to be able to do even more cool sort of particle motion graphic-y things in After Effects. Particular is the way to go. Shine is what is giving it this sort of shining into existence effect that you see in the trailer. Then there's some other levels applied. which just tweak the values of the color from the original base image. Then let's get into the particles themselves. So back here, we've got our first base layer of zeros and ones. These were time remapped in After Effects to fit with the music that was written for the short, for the teaser that you'll find out about in another video. We've got another layer of particles that I layered on top with even more blur and introduced some color, so it wasn't just a stark monochromatic thing. But lots of streaky motion blur to make them kind of ghosty, but also adds a bit of variety into this image. Then we've got that same additional layer of zeros and ones, but without that blurry treatment. Some more particles, those big chunky ones that whoosh by camera. That's what we've got going on here. Then we've got a layer for the coming soon text, which definitely do this kind of thing in After Effects if you can. Editorial programs can do them, but I've found that the motion is much smoother and you can introduce slight motion blur if you want, which helps if you're animating the position of something, just to introduce a natural amount of motion blur onto it. It's what we're used to seeing, and a lot of times things feel too crisp unless you do that. So that's why I did this in After Effects. Then we've got our Sentient Cinema logo, kind of doing its thing, nothing special there. And then we've got some final treatments, like so. Okay, so one thing that I've learned in many years of visual effects and sort of trying to make things look real is when you're dealing with CG generated images, you want to add a bit of diffusion. And all that is basically a very large amount of blur, just very lightly applied to the image. So its opacity is, let's see what I had the opacity at. We've got the opacity at 100 here. But I think what I did with this layer was just a very slight amount of Gaussian blur. Let's see. Yeah, just 0.5 pixels of Gaussian blur. Then on this other diffusion layer, which I'll turn on, and you'll see that kind of just does a very subtle little pop in luminance. But yeah, this is the one where I applied a very heavy Gaussian blur, 23.5 pixels, and brought that opacity down to 16%. If I bring this back up, you'll see it kind of behaves almost like a glow, and it just adds a sort of bit of organicness to it. Makes it just seem a little bit less, rendered and digital. So a bit of diffusion, a couple layers of diffusion. Highly recommend that for making stuff just look a little bit more organic, a little bit more naturally lit. Again, to help with the sort of more organic nature of it, I've added a bit of noise, and you'll see that pop on here, especially in the streaky, motion blurred bits of the particles, and that also we're used to seeing in the sort of language of film and even digital video, a certain amount of noise or grain, and so adding this in kind of reintroduces what we kind of are used to seeing, and it also does a bit of work to homogenize the whole image along with the diffusion, and takes our 8-bit gradients that we're getting from what was rendered out of Nuke and smooths them together. And I rendered out of Nuke and 8-bit because I knew I was going to do this. I was going to apply this noise, so it was going to be okay. And then I have a final levels, which is just crushing the blacks down a bit from applying that noise. You'll see in the darks of the image there's a little bit more of a sort of lift because of that noise, and so I apply this crush and then just gets rid of that slight lift that we're getting in the noise. And there you have it. That's how we got the final image that then gets brought into Final Cut, and a little bit more retiming, a few other tweaks in there, but this is the majority of the work that was done to get this image. Okay, well that's it for now. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and tune in for the next video coming up very soon, which will be about the process of recording the dialogue with our actor that was used in the teaser. So we'll have a quick video on that next time. on sentientcinema.com. Thanks.